did see a movie recently. Both of us saw Godzilla
-1.
minus one, right? What were your feelings about
I
that?
really enjoyed it. Of course, previously before that, I had watched Shin Godzilla,
Uh-huh.
which was the previous Japanese version of Godzilla. I really enjoyed that one. I like the just to compare it to this one, the Godzilla in Shin Godzilla was more monstrous.
Mm.
When he starts off, he didn't even look like Godzilla. Looks like a snake type creature, and it's got like blood constantly coming out of his gills. It was more terrifying. But I did
Mm.
enjoy Godzilla -1. Um, and I may have messed up, and I watched it on Netflix, and I got lazy, and I watched it with the uh,
Dubbing.
dub instead of the subtitle. I know some people complain about it, saying that it would took away from some of the dramatic scenes. But I think if you're going to watch a movie that's dubbed, you should know the dubs aren't going to be perfect.
Right.
Somebody reading a script in a recording booth. They're not on
Right.
set with interacting with people. But I still enjoyed it. I thought it was really good.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost made the same mistake because I think by default it starts to show you the dub version.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to watch the dub version because my feeling is, you're right, no dub is going to be perfect. And it's also true that no subtitle, the translations for the subtitles, they're never going to be perfect either. There's always going to be some expressions that can't be directly translated into, something that English-speaking people would understand. There's so much of the subtlety that we lose in any translation. And I assume they don't have the greatest translators in the world, the greatest literary
Right.
minds working on these things. So it's going to be a compromise. But for me, if I'm reading it, I can say, okay, I know that probably doesn't, it wasn't meant to sound as clunky as that. It's probably
Yeah.
just a translation. So the power of the performance and the original actor's voice uh, sort of compensates for that. I didn't see Shin Godzilla, although I plan to now. But I have to admit, this was a real revelation for me. I
Oh yeah.
I pretty much written Godzilla off my list of things that I had to pay
Yeah.
attention to anymore. I think it really comes down to what we've spoken about so often on episodes about all the movies that we've talked about, is having a real world environment with real people that you care about. That's the essence of a good film. If it's just like we were talking about with the horror movies, if it's just grabbing a tired old premise, a formula of monster pops up and destroys stuff, and then, people flee and making the human aspect of it secondary, that would not be of interest, and it wouldn't be causing the extraordinary reaction that we're seeing to this film.
Yeah.
Uh,
It, even when I compare it with the the more recent Hollywood Godzillas,
mm,
the human characters in those you don't care about
right.
as you do with these characters. Even though it was almost the same length of film, we spent just as much time with the human
And
characters in both films.
and they
But
had much bigger budgets for the American
but the
films.
American version, I'm just like, I don't care about these characters at all. I mean, and I like the idea of because we gotta admit, Godzilla, even the old Toho, eventually became goofy.
Oh
You
God,
know,
yes. Right from the second film, really.
yeah, Son of Godzilla and all that just became like goofy and slapstick.
Right.
And this brought it back to that original, where
Yes.
it's just a terror, coming through the city, and you don't know why. It doesn't matter. You don't doesn't matter why he's going through there. You
Right.
don't need a backstory on him or anything like that.
Well, Godzilla and creatures like that, they have to take backseat to the human drama. There has to be a human story because it's just not that interesting. I mean, the only thing that Godzilla has to offer is the menace, the threat
Yeah.
of death, and the spectacle. Uh, but without that's not the sort of thing we usually emotionally react to. I mean, I found that I was moved by several things that happened in this movie within the first 10, 15 minutes,
Yeah.
which is very unusual. And there are a number of moments throughout the film that are real heart-tugging moments. You could almost say that the very final thing with not to give too much away, but one of the characters who you thought was dead turns up to be alive. that might be tugging the heartstrings a little too much,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
To give a really happy ending to it. But I appreciated it because it meant that the storyteller, and I guess the director is also the writer of this, and he also headed up the special effects team. Uh, he appreciated the fact that, when you spend time with people, it's a sign of respect for the characters that you've created and also for the audience, that you just don't sort of throw them away in a
yeah,
casual way. So, and also the hero, the idea of an imperfect person uh, being the hero of the piece, the person that we're following.
yeah.
He's not a super heroic character. And I also think it was a good idea given the ground that they were covering here. Here's a kamikaze pilot who survives because he was too scared to
Yeah.
complete his mission.
That to me,
Um,
that was the I'm not a kamikaze pilot. I don't have any experience in it, but I really, you can relate to that, to his character of,
very easily,
oh, I don't want to die crashing my plane into a ship, so I'm
right?
gonna I'm gonna go hide.
And it would be very easy to make the mistake of having the final action in the film being him finally achieving his mission as a kamikaze pilot. And they don't do that. As a matter of fact, they very clearly state that the characters in this don't think that that sort of sacrifice is acceptable.
Yeah,
They object to the idea of the government asking men to kill themselves in defense of the country. Self-sacrifice, which is something that I always like to see in movies. That I always, like in Poseidon Adventure, when Gene Hackman kills himself to save the others, that is one thing. But the government's saying you have to get into this thing, and we're only giving you enough fuel to go
yeah,
one way. Uh, that is immoral, I think. So it would have been very easy for them to become like jingoistic and to say, yay, Japan, we're gonna, our kamikaze pilots are back.
yeah,
We all developed the courage and the nerve to fight the enemy to the death. But it's not a message like that. It's more a message of, yes, there are things we have to do to defeat this enemy, to meet this crisis, but we shouldn't be careless about the lives of our fellow citizens. And the fact that the mission that's mounted is all a civilian thing.
yeah,
That definitely they managed to move away from that sort of jingoistic thing of making it about how great the Japanese military is or how great the Japanese government is. The thing that always has to be remembered with all these things is that it has to be a people story first. It has to be about the
yeah,
people, and the monster is secondary. This is something that even see this mistake of flopping that around and making the monster the central thing is even the problem with like the Jaws sequels. Right? In the first film, it's all about the people because
yeah,
they didn't really have a working shark that they could
yeah,
use. So that wasn't an option. You couldn't really show that. But as soon as they got this enormous success behind them and they could spend a little more money on the shark, then it was just shark, 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 shark.
yeah.
And that doesn't work because who
Give
cares?
the shark a chip on his shoulder and chases the family down
Right?
and
Yes.
gets his revenge.
And I suppose if the series had gone on long enough, the shark would have developed superpowers
Yeah,
or, something like that, which is what we see in a lot of these things. They just become more and more ridiculous, more and more comic booky. And that's why this is so surprising, because it seems to go directly in the opposite direction. It goes against the trend of making these franchises into stupider and stupider things.
yeah. And
You know,
he's only in what, three scenes?
Godzilla,
He's in the opening scene when we first see him when he attacks the little island, and then when he comes to Japan and does his fire blast, it basically recreates the bomb drop, and then of course
right?
the end of the movie when they take him out.
Big climactic scene, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the way it should be, I think. You
Oh yeah.
you you don't want to ruin the effectiveness of your monster by constantly having them on display throughout the movie. This looks like a director. I know he said in one interview that Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind were films that really affected him and made him want to be a filmmaker. And it seems to me he learned all the right lessons from Spielberg and Lucas's early
Yeah.
works. Uh, a lot of the filmmakers that were doing like the second wave Godzilla movies back in I guess in the 90s, there was a bunch of Godzilla movies that had a slightly darker tone. It looked like they were spending a little more money on them, and they were making use of some, limited way, making use of some CGI stuff.
Yeah, Godzilla 2000, stuff like that.
Right, yeah. And the problem was that they seemed to be more influenced by like the goofy Spielberg Lucas things. Like they were
Yeah,
more taking from the Goonies or something like that, rather than from Close Encounters or from Star Wars.
yeah,
So but it's the dramaturgy, it's the way the story is told, and understanding of what makes an emotionally effective story. That's what this guy figured out. He managed to get that from watching those classic films from Lucas and Spielberg.
I think
Fortunately,
when I watched that Godzilla 2000, and I'd made a comment that it was just horrible. It was like The Matrix meets Godzilla. All the humans were like superheroes, and it just wasn't good at all.
well, also it's funny. Funny. Usually in the later Godzilla movies, the ones that were done in the 90s, they usually have like some sort of science fictional aspect where they've built a robot that's going to fight Godzilla, or they
Yeah,
have a
Mecha
whole
Godzilla.
right? A whole team of folks in spaceship-like crafts that are going to fight Godzilla. That was even true in the 1980-ish version that ended up being released in the United States, also with Raymond Burr's stuff. Do you
Yeah,
remember that one?
85. It was yeah, they called it Godzilla 85.
85, okay, yeah. And towards the end, there's some sort of science fictional type spacecraft that they've come up with to fight Godzilla. And that always seems kind of silly. Here, they managed to work in a similar element, but they ground it in reality to some extent.
Yeah,
I don't know if there was ever any sort of experimental aircraft like the one that's shown in this, but that's not a far-fetched idea. We know that
right.
there were things that the Germans and the Japanese were doing that they just never got off the drawing board, so to speak, because the war ended and that these things were never deployed. So it's grounded in reality to a certain extent, and it's not such a ridiculous. Like if they had a aircraft that had laser guns or something, I
Yeah.
think it's such a careful balancing act, right? You want to show stuff that's going to be exciting to the audience, but you can't go so far as to make it ridiculous or implausible, and they managed to
Yeah.
walk that line very well here.
It even had that, even the ending wasn't like a one and done. It was, okay, we've got him to sink
Yes,
now, but he's still alive and he's coming,
right.
so it was like, are we really going, is this really going to happen,
Well, I thought I saw the influence of Star Wars there when that fellow pops
Yeah.
up, just like Han at the end of Star
Yeah.
Wars. Yeah. But that's fine, it works, right? Having that sort of double ending where you think you've destroyed the monster and then he's still alive.
Yeah.
And it also gives the true focus of the film, the hero of the film, an opportunity to finally become a hero.
Yeah. Turn off his computer and take out the
Right.
Death Star.
Exactly, right. Yes. But yeah, so I have high praise for it. That was very good.
Yeah, and I'm sad about this. I think that sometime this month, next month, they're actually releasing on Netflix the Godzilla minus collar, which is how I would really wanted to see it. It was in
Oh,
black and
they
white.
in
Yeah,
black and
so
white. Yes.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I think that I'll have to rewatch it then when they release that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that would be an interesting thing as a sort of companion to the original film.
Yeah,
Although the colors in this are fairly muted, so
yeah,
it's not that vividly colorful a film.
yeah.
But I mean, all the technical aspects of it, as far as I can see, are perfectly fine and very impressive and amazing in some moments of the film.
Oh, yeah.
Even though the film only cost something like 11 to 12 million dollars,
Yeah, it was pretty cheap.
spectacular in a way that a lot of the American films that cost 100 million, aren't
Yeah,
don't manage to achieve, which is kind of weird.
I'm surprised it didn't win more awards.
Well, I mean, I have a feeling that the reason why it got the Oscar, the reason why it was even considered for the Oscar, is because people really like the movie, and they like the
Yeah.
movie because of the story, the direction, the writing, and the acting.
Now the
So,
minus one, do you take that to be that this is a prequel?
I guess it
as
is,
well.
although it's sort of a remake of the first one in a way.
Yeah, I just couldn't figure
Uh,
out what that's the only way I could get like -1 would have to me would be this happened before the first one.
yeah, but it doesn't. One would assume that uh, that doesn't work because
Hey,
there's only one time that can be the first time for
yeah.
Godzilla showing up.
Well,
Uh,
I thought of that before I watched it. I thought when I was gonna watch it, I thought, okay, this has happened before, and this is like or this was the first time, and it leads into the first one or
well,
something.
well,
I don't
that
know.
was what I was sort
I
of
didn't know how they were gonna
expecting.
do it. Yeah.
I was sort of expecting that at some point this story would sort of join up with the story of
For
the
the first
original.
one. Yeah.
But that didn't really happen. It really is sort of a remake or retelling of
Yeah.
the story of the original one. What I look at as -1 sort of reminds me of when we started to see issue 0 in comic book series.
Right. Yeah.
And what I would say this is, it's sort of like an alternate universe telling, an alternate universe prequel or
Yeah.
an alternate universe reboot of the series. Uh, it obviously from a technical standpoint, it's much more impressive than the first film because the
Right.
first
Yeah.
film was a relatively low budget thing, and it was, the technology just wasn't there to do the sort of disaster stuff that we
Right.
see in this movie. But it's a very sophisticated piece of filmmaking. There's so many things about it where you could see where it could go wrong. Like for instance, that many of the Japanese giant monster movies have this problem of having very broad comedy, sort of as a sidelight, characters that are,
Yeah.
"Woo." And this flirts with that a little bit. Some of the guys on the boat are a little goofy,
Yeah.
but it doesn't go ridiculous it doesn't go to that ridiculous extreme. Also, the idea of his relationship with the woman turning into a romance. They managed to avoid that, or they treat it in a very subtle way. I mean, I
Yeah.
suppose it's left to our imaginations as to whether or not the two of them are actually living as man and wife. He's denying fairly late into the movie that the girl is his daughter and then that's his wife.
Yeah.
So it gives us this when people deny their emotions or they deny their attractions, it's that much more heartwarming if those people stay together, right? When somebody says she's not really my wife, and then he goes to these great lengths to try to, you know, save her or protect her, and he's obviously destroyed when she appears to be dead. It's
Yeah.
devastating for him. So that's an interesting way of handling it. Whereas I have a feeling in an American film, they'd be in bed
Oh
together,
yeah. The
within
first
15
scene.
minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so that's kind of good. The fact that we don't have um, the sort of reinforcement of these sort of traditional ideas, that what was the line that Thelma Ritter had in Rear Window? A guy and a girl should come together like two cabs on Fifth
Yeah.
Avenue. That seems to always be the way in Hollywood films. Because they're basically, I won't say they're propaganda, but they're basically like style guides for living.
Right.
This is the
Yeah.
way men should be, this is the way women should be, and this is the way they should interact. In this, it's a rather unusual approach to it. The whole idea that late in the film the guy would be denying in front of his friends that with the girl sitting there,
Yeah.
that the girl is his daughter, makes him seem like a much deeper person. There's a lot more going on there
Right. Yeah.
than normal. So that's really interesting and admirable. It could have been played in a much more direct way, and it wouldn't have been nearly as effective, I think.
Right. Yeah.
And
No,
even
I'm
the business with the guy beating him up. I mean that
yeah.
for a while there, I didn't quite understand what was going on, but then he intentionally sent the guy letters that he knew he would violently
Yeah.
react and rage for to get him there as quickly as possible, which is kind of a clever idea,
Yeah.
you know. That's the sort of stuff where you could say that could be very tedious if he was just writing normal letters. Please
Yeah.
come as quickly as possible. But they managed to put a little twist on it that makes it interesting. So anyway,
Yeah.
so that's a
I'm
good one.
sure enough people have seen it. We can probably talk about spoilers. Um, with our we're talking about the love interest or maybe the love interest. She clearly gets destroyed by that by that blast. There's no way she came back at the. Do you think that was a add-on later?
Well,
Audience
possibly so.
audience said, "Well, we don't want her to die, so they just kind of bring her back, even though there's
Well,
no way she survived that."
yeah, it would be kind of hard to imagine, right? But I mean, I suppose on the other hand, you could say, there was a lot of stories after the bombing of Hiroshima about stuff that you would assume would have been destroyed
Yeah,
that
yeah.
somehow remained standing. So, we'll give them a benefit of the doubt, maybe say somehow. Uh, the thing that I slightly objected to is the bubbling of the skin on the Godzilla corpse as it was floating.
Yeah.
I think just a shot of that would have been enough to say, yes, we're not done with
Yeah.
Godzilla. Sort of like Spock's uh, proton torpedo casket laying on
Yeah.
the Genesis planet at the end of Star Trek 2. We don't need to see a hand opening the lid and then
Right,
getting
yeah.
out, right? Uh, by doing it, it saps a little bit the power of the story because I think one really brilliant thing that they did was they did destroy Godzilla, right? He may regenerate, but
Yeah.
it would have been tempting, I would think, for a lot of filmmakers to say, let's do that in a sort of way so you can't really be sure if Godzilla's been destroyed or not, and that wouldn't nearly be as satisfying because the Godzilla is kind of like the Death Star in this movie.
Yeah.
He's not a character that we should be sympathizing with, and we should be happy to see him get his head blown off. So when that happens, I think that was a good idea, and it was slightly damaged, I think, by having the corpse appear to start
Yeah.
regenerating at the very end.
Well, it's like
But
in the
that's a
original, yeah, in the original, it was cut to like just bones. And then when they
right,
made
yeah,
the sequel, it's like, well, how do we bring this back? So they kind of hinted at maybe it's a different Godzilla,
right.
you know?
Well, my feeling about that is that just as the case with we can't really figure out if this is supposed to be a prequel or a remake or whatever,
Yeah.
none of that matters. If you're telling an interesting story, nobody gives a shit, right?
Yeah.
And when you look at with all the effort that goes into trying to keep the continuity straight between movies, the continuity is always fucked up if things go
Yeah.
on long enough. So why bother trying? Uh, just tell an interesting story. People are only interested in one movie at a time. You can't watch the whole
Yeah.
series at once. So, and it gives people to talk about something to talk about afterwards, right? You can say, "Oh yeah, they changed this, so they changed this timeline." That's, irrelevant. The emotional impact of this movie is what makes it impressive
Yeah.
by itself. I don't care what's going to happen in the future. I
Right.
may not
Yeah.
even be around when they make the next.
Yeah.
2012 was that the last time or 2016?
I think so. Yeah.
2016 was the last Shin Godzilla, right?
Yeah.
So it's been quite a while between movies. So who knows how long it'll be before we see another one. Uh, but yeah, I don't worry about stuff like that too much, to be
Yeah.
honest. Uh, as far as any other, I can't think of any real criticisms I would have of the movie.
That's the only thing I had, other than I watched it with the dub. But
Mhm. Well, that's a good warning to make to
yeah,
people,
when the
right? Make
black and white
sure,
version comes out, though, I will watch it subtitled. I'll make sure
yeah,
I turn all that off.
it'll be interesting to see it in black and white, and it might be interesting to see how the translation and the subtitles differs
Yeah.
from the dub version. Yeah. But and the performances were all very solid. I thought there was
Oh yeah.
nothing. Yeah, yeah, it's good all around. It's really refreshing to see something like that. I never would have guessed
Yeah, I
that
know.
Godzilla would come to our rescue. But all the stinkers that are coming out lately from Hollywood, really, it's encouraging to see. There's some other place where maybe some good stuff will come from.
Yeah, I know. I think it's been a year now since we done our Dark Shadows episode, which was turned out to be pretty popular, more popular than I thought it was going to be
Oh yeah.
for this channel. Yeah,
Mhm.
based on stuff we talked about previously. What do you think helped it out or spurred that interest in that show and movie that we talked about?
It is a mystery because, to be honest with you, my experience with Dark Shadows fans is that I won't say they're toxic like Star Wars fans, but
Yeah.
they have a sort of they have a mean streak in them. If they feel you're saying something about their show or about their beloved Jonathan Frid that they don't like, they come at you with fangs and claws bared.
I did
So
notice. So I guess we one of us, both of us, maybe had mentioned how he didn't seem like the leading man type, and we got a comment saying that you don't have to be handsome to be a
right.
leading man. And I'm like, well, I guess we've upset somebody, but
Well, that was as bad as it got, other than somebody who objected to my dismissal of the comic artist, the guy that did the comic for
yeah,
Charlton. But other than those comments, most of the comments, and I don't know how many we have now on that, Might be what, 20 or 30 comments, maybe
Something like
more.
that. Yeah, maybe more.
And last I looked, it was something like 19,000 views.
Yep, still getting
Uh,
views even today.
yeah, so that's surprising. And I think, to be honest with you, and I guess this is as good an episode as any to do a little introspection as to what works for something like what we're trying to do here. The advantage of that episode was almost by accident, we ended up creating like a little documentary about the whole history of Dark Shadows.
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of people who, even folks who maybe weren't wildly crazy about the show, there was a nostalgia appeal to being able to go back and relive the whole thing from its inception to its wild popularity to its eventual cancellation, and then all the movies that were done over the years. That's kind of an entertaining thing to watch.
Yeah.
And, sometimes we might, maybe in some of our other episodes, we assume that people know all the history of the things we're talking about. And maybe that's something, I guess, going forward, we always have to remember to let people know what the hell it is we're talking about. So not everybody is completely familiar with these movies, especially the type of obscure things that we talk about.
Yeah. Like like you said, I mean it was I think better doing instead of just a review or just what we, I'm saying, like giving a history of it and all that. I
Right.
think that really helped it out.
Yeah. It serves some purpose as an informational piece as well as being a critique. Actually, we didn't really have any strongly critical things to say,
We were
but
critical of the remake, the movie though.
that's true,
Yeah.
yes. But I think deservedly so. I mean, that was $100 million movie at the very least. So that really should come in for stronger criticism. And I don't think even Tim Burton would mind particularly because you don't get the impression he really gave a shit about that
Yeah.
movie. It's like something he was doing just to have something to put
Just
into
a
the
paycheck,
theaters.
just a paycheck.
Right.
Yeah.
When you started the show, it had more of a party kind of quality to it, right?
It kind of,
Many,
when it started off, it was just me and Billy, and we would just basically talk about the movie, what we liked about it, stuff we didn't like about it, or the impact it had on us,
right,
seeing a lot of these older movies as a kid. And when I started bringing more people on, it became more of a, you know, let's have fun, just talking about a movie.
right,
Then it got to the point where we were, like I think like our Bloodbeat episode to me was like once we done that one and it was a movie that we could enjoy but also make fun of, poke fun of. We
right.
got some good funny moments out of it. I think that was probably one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, that was a highlight. Absolutely. Yeah.
Especially the fact that we just went into it. I didn't.
Right,
I watched the movie and then just, hey, we're going to talk about it. I didn't plan anything. I didn't,
right,
and it just flowed. You know what I'm saying? It
right.
had this nice flow to it. So,
Yeah.
and you edited the episode. I'm sure there wasn't a lot you had to take out or
Not really, no.
so.
Yeah. I mean, when I edit the episode, and I guess we sort of go back and forth on it. Sometimes you edit the episode that
Yeah.
it gets on, and sometimes I do. I just try to sort of compress everything and get rid of the redundant stuff and get rid of the stuff that I know is factually wrong,
All right.
because I guess that's probably the worst sin that we could, if we know something is
Yeah.
wrong and we're still allowed to go
Still
out,
leave it in
then
there. Yeah.
yeah, then we would be deserving of any criticism. There's a lot of stuff that's gone on over the past year about plagiarism with these type of YouTube videos. Um, I forget the name of the guy that did, and this is something I should have
Yeah. We
researched.
should have. Yeah.
There was a fellow who has a show, a thing where he does essays, and he did like a 2 hour essay on a YouTube channel, a fellow that uh, does film criticism, I guess horror and genre film criticism from a queer perspective. And apparently what he was doing, and he developed quite a reputation, he had a very, very large following. And apparently what he was doing is he was taking stuff from other people, from other
Right.
sources, and he was presenting it as his own stuff. So this fellow went through many of his videos and said, this is stolen, this is stolen, this is stolen. And for a while there, it was really a big deal I don't know if you caught any of that, but there were people,
I don't really think about that one, but I know there was a couple of like tech review websites where they were just going to like cnet.com, copying an article and just reading it word for word
right?
almost, maybe changing a little bit to try to, but people were obviously saw it and were like, let's basically just rip that person off.
Yeah, apparently it's a widespread problem. And he
Yeah.
actually cited some other matter of fact, that fellow James Rolfe who does Cine Massacre, I
Yeah,
think he got caught up in something like that too, where one of
I
the
think he
people that
did. I
was
think
writing,
his problem though was I think once he started having once he joined like another channel where they were paying him and they were expecting, video, you got to have a video
right,
one a week, I think it just got too much for him. Or
right.
that, or he had writers that were um plagiarizing other articles and he didn't
I
know
think that
about
was
it.
it. Yeah.
Something like that, yeah.
At least that's what he claimed. And I see no reason to not to believe him because it seems like a very likely thing that
Yeah.
the writers, since the face is not on the screen, they feel free to engage in plagiarism because they're not going to be criticized
Yeah.
directly for it.
Well, I've been
Uh,
watching him for a while, and I can tell you, like his earlier stuff that I know that he wrote because it was just him and one other guy was like
right,
brilliant stuff. He done a whole series about board games, and was like had this like story that went through all the episodes. It was brilliant.
right,
Like that's great.
yeah. Yeah, he was really a big deal at one point. I just saw a video that just came out, another lengthy essay from Dan Olson, I think is the guy's name. Uh, he has the Folding Ideas channel on YouTube, and he
Mhm.
did a 1 hour and 16-minute essay on James Rolfe. Uh, and I watched some of it, and it's not harshly critical, but it's critical of him.
Right.
Uh, and I thought to myself when I was watching it, this Dan Olson guy, he's obviously a smart guy. And he's put a lot of effort into this video because it's over an hour and it's shot very carefully with special lighting and things. And he has a tape recorder, a wheel-to-wheel tape recorder. It almost looks like he's doing a production of Samuel Beckett's Crap's Last Tape, where
Yeah.
he's hunched over the tape recorder with a microphone and talking about this James Rolfe guy. And I think to myself, even if the things he's saying are true, is James Rolfe that important a figure that we should have this sort of analysis of
Yeah.
him? And isn't it a little unfair? I mean, Ralph, you don't get the impression, even though he says that he aspires to be a filmmaker, or at least he used to, you don't really get the impression that this is somebody that sought out the spotlight. This sort of happened accidentally in
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
way over the course of years. Uh, so we're sort of criticizing somebody just because by luck, he happened to be popular. He happened to be somebody that people responded to.
Right.
Just seems unnecessary. I wish Mr. Olson would put his time and effort into something else.
Maybe it's jealousy.
Well, he might be. I mean, James Ruff, like I say, at one time he was pretty much the biggest thing on YouTube, right?
Yeah, I know he did make a movie also, maybe
Yeah.
two, I can't remember.
That's one of the things that this Stan Olsen guy was criticizing was the angry video game nerd. Is that the name of his original show?
Yeah, yeah. The movie was mainly just that character with a different story, and I want to say the story, I've never seen it, but I think it has something to do with the ET Atari cartridge that they dumped in landfills. I think
Right.
it has something to do with that and aliens come or something. But I think it was just that character was in this movie.
Mm.
It wasn't a movie of him, critiquing video games like he does on the show.
Well, I guess that's good, but the uh, the problem with a lot of these folks that are doing these videos, these video essays about movies, is that you get the impression that they're not really speaking from experience at all. I mean, they're speaking from the experience of being people who watch a lot of movies,
Yeah.
but they're not really speaking from the experience of people who've actually tried to make movies, real feature films. And that probably works against them in a way because they seem to have ridiculously high standards for
Yeah.
everybody. Their standards would probably diminish quite a bit if they actually gave it a try themselves, and then they'd be a
Yeah.
little more sympathetic.
I mean, I find
Uh,
myself doing that. Like, I get on here and talk about movies and then I watch one of these like low budget, we raised money on Kickstarter, we filmed it in a weekend, and I'm just like, what are you doing? That is
yeah.
it's the worst thing I've ever seen. And I've never made a movie, but I could watch a movie and tell you didn't put any work into this at all. Like, what are you doing?
Well, that might be the best standard or the thing that we should be most concerned about when we're critiquing low budget films. Is does it really appear that any a great amount of thought or effort went into it, or is it something that looks like it was done over a weekend with,
Yeah.
because uh, it's very difficult with indie films that are done on a very low level, a few $1,000s, or whatever. It's very difficult to critique things like the acting because what's the chances you're going to be able to get talented actors to work on a
Right. Yeah.
micro budget production? So I feel for the filmmakers that are putting things out that get harshly criticized. But I also know I've seen plenty of the things that like you're talking about that just look like there's something thrown together where people don't even bother to do things like put in room tone so that when you cut from one camera to the other, you don't have that
Yeah.
variation in background sound. You would think that there's some things that by now everybody would sort of understand. And if you don't do those basic things, it's a like willful avoidance of the things you have to do to make, a successful or at least presentable film.
Yeah. I mean, like when I watch some of these, and I follow a lot of these people on Facebook, so I see whenever they post their Kickstarter or Indiegogo, they're like, we're trying to raise money, and you go to it, and they're wanting like $10,000 or whatever,
Right.
and then the campaign ends, and then a month later the movie's out, and you're like, there's no way, and then you watch it, and you're like, how did they get Eric Roberts to be in this movie?
Yeah.
And it's
It's
just I just don't, and I just wonder where that money actually goes. Yeah.
well, that's an
I think
interesting
they pocket
question.
a
Yeah,
lot of it and they just kind of,
that's
film
possible. Sure.
whatever.
I mean, one could have a career doing that, right? Uh, raise as much money as you can on with the various crowdfunding platforms. Live off of that money, and
Yeah.
occasionally, make some little thing, in a couple of days with minimal editing. I don't think anybody could ever accuse me of that because I'm still
Yeah.
re-editing my movies
Yeah.
after 20 years, So
It just
that,
feels cheap whenever someone's like, "Hey, I'm going to make a movie and it's going to be Amityville something else."
yeah.
It's just cheap. It's just, but then again, I think maybe it works because I watch them out of like I have to see how bad this is. So I'll watch it, So I'm like, yeah, maybe they stumbled on this, the key here to get people to watch your movie.
Well, maybe. I mean, I've had disagreements with people about what the best business model is now with the current in the current environment that we're
Yeah.
in. How can one make a living making low budget movies? And I had an actor friend who had his own theory. And he wanted to make short films, take to the festivals. Maybe I've talked about this before on here, but uh, in his mind, he was thinking, I want to do something on the level of Succession. And now Succession is a enormously well-made show. I don't question that. But it's also expensive and also has people that have been working in the industry for, 40 years. Brian Cox, I think, got his starred in acting back in the 70s, if I'm not
Yeah, yeah.
mistaken. And he's recognized one of the great actors doing work today. Uh, so my feeling is very unlikely that anybody will ever be able to make on a small level, just starting out, something that will rival Netflix, or I don't know if that's Netflix or HBO Max or whatever it is, but uh, that's just not a realistic goal. My argument to my actor friend was to sit him down in front of my smart TV and to put up things like Shark Exorcist and
Yeah.
Robo Woman. And I said to him, this is stuff that's being done that goes on to all the streaming platforms, and the directors or the filmmakers are making a decent living with this, with Shark Exorcist. And if we could bring our intelligence and our talent and our experience to making movies in the same way, but making better movies,
Yeah.
then we would also be able to get on Tubi and all these other platforms, and maybe we'd be able to establish ourselves and establish our names. At least we'd have a recognizable name, so people could say, "Oh yeah, I know that guy because I saw his movie on Tubi," right? That seemed to me to be a practical approach. And my actor friend seemed to think I was suggesting that we should make movies like Shark Exorcist,
Yeah.
which obviously was not the idea. So I think you could conceivably make you'd have to give a lot of thought to how you could do it. You have to develop an aesthetic that fits with, maybe a $10,000 or $15,000 budget. Or
Right.
conceivably, you could make one or two of those a year and have them all up on the streaming platforms. And eventually, if you're able to keep making those films, eventually you might make something that's actually good.
Yeah. Well, you gotta have a good script. We said that before. Start with a
That's
good
the,
script
yeah.
and keep the story or whatever, don't do a space movie if you know you can't afford to build decent looking space sets. I
Right.
mean, so if you're going to do Shark Exorcist and you're using a little toy shark, I mean, and you're filming it in a lake, if you can't go film in the ocean, don't even bother. Just work
Yeah.
on, put that effort and that money into something else.
Well, and also
A crime drama would be easier to do and
you
might turn
wonder
out better.
sometimes, maybe even getting some actors together and doing some improvisation sessions and taking the best bits and putting that into a screenplay, the way somebody like Mike Leigh, the British director, does. There's this appreciation of bad films, which runs like a vein through indie filmmaking going back for 20, 30 years now. The cult of people like Ed Wood or Andy Milligan and folks like that.
Yeah,
And so
all the
people
shot on
think,
video movies of the 80s.
right, all that stuff, that junky stuff, which almost, if you didn't know better, you would say it was intended to be bad. There's a lot of people that look at stuff like that. Their attitude is, well, if that person can do it, so can I.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk for a minute while I take some water?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's why you see so many like just slasher in the woods movie because everybody thinks, well, it's cheap to do. We got in the woods. We don't need permits. Just a guy in a mask, some fake blood. But if you don't have a good story, which to be honest, and slasher in the woods, even Friday 13th aren't really good stories. I mean, it's just death scenes and boobs
Right.
is all you really get. But I think that's why those are so popular for people to make.
Body count movies are really just an exploitation premise, right? It's just uh, almost like the porno formula.
Yeah.
Every few minutes you're going to have a sex scene. The story doesn't matter. If you make movies like that, then it's almost as if you're giving in right at the start. You're saying this is going to be bad.
Yeah.
But still, we do see people that have a remarkable appreciation for these films. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a film critic on Twitter who had some nice things to say about Sleepless Nights, which I appreciated. And he mentioned he's a big fan of Andy Milligan. And he also mentioned this book, which I acquired from Amazon. Now, this is a thing written by a fellow by the name of Bill Landis. It's called SLEAZOID Express. And it's basically a history of exploitation movies of the sort of grindhouse variety, the sort of Times Square, 42nd Street theater fare that was popular through the 60s, 70s, and I guess up until the AIDS crisis and the crack crisis in New York
Yeah.
caused those little shitty movie theaters in Times Square to start to shut down. What's interesting about books like this, and it's a very interesting read, what's interesting about it is it seems like people are who have a special appreciation for that type of movie. They're in love with the whole environment in which those movies were screened. They're in love with that what I guess they feel is the romantic environment of the Times Square grindhouse. And the movies almost seem secondary. It's almost like mood music that was put on in the theaters as a background
Yeah.
for the various other activities that were going on. And of course, a lot of criminality, a lot of the producers of the stuff were shady characters. A lot of the porn movies early on were financed by the mob. A lot of the porn theaters were owned by mob associated people. So there's that element of danger that makes it interesting and exciting, I guess, to people. But I have to admit, in the case of Andy Milligan, who is a very abrasive and some would say obnoxious figure, uh, his life is more interesting than his movies, in my opinion. I mean, I've never been able to sit through an Andy Milligan movie. I just find them, terrible. I don't know if you've ever or even
I don't
know
know if I don't know if I've seen any or not.
what would be The Rats Are Coming, The Werewolves Are Here. That's one. There's a bunch of other uh, te fairly terrible horror movies, sometimes involving vampires and werewolves and things like that. And they were all shot by this man, Andy Milligan, I think on 16 millimeter. And they were all shot, even though sometimes they take place in medieval Europe, they were all shot in places like Staten Island.
Yeah.
And when you watch them, and I know that that director whose name I can never pronounce, Winding, right? Uh, oh, what the hell's his name? Anyway, I'll think of it.
Right.
He's a popular director now who's taken an interest in Andy Milligan, and he had all of his films restored and put out on Blu-ray or 4K or something ridiculous like that. Uh, and so clearly there are people, intelligent people, that appreciate this guy's work, but it's all terrible stuff. In my opinion, it's all muted sound and fairly bad cinematography and fairly awful acting. So I don't know really why people would find Mr. Milligan's work so interesting,
Yeah.
except for the fact that he himself was an interesting figure in the way Ed Wood was,
Right.
you know. And we haven't had an Andy Milligan movie yet, but I have a feeling that that might be in the offering at some point. Except he wasn't a sympathetic figure. He apparently was kind of a nasty guy. And I don't know if drugs and alcohol also played a part in his life story. I also have his
Right.
book. There's a book about him that I have on order from Amazon, so I'll let you know. There's another thing that we hear being debated a lot lately is, the folks that are sort of saying the movies are over.
Yeah.
Even as formidable a figure as Jerry Seinfeld said he thought that the movies were over. And he said that while he was promoting his
The first
crappy
movie
movie
from
about cereal or whatever the
yeah,
fuck it was.
the inventor of the Pop-Tart is what the movie
Well,
was about. Yeah.
if that's the movie he's promoting, then maybe he's right. Maybe the movies
Yeah.
are over. But I don't agree with that. I think that's nonsense. I think what we're seeing simply is the a change in viewership habits.
Yeah.
It's not that movies are over. It's that theaters as a way of seeing movies
Is
is
over.
going to
Yeah.
diminish. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
going to diminish because it's just ridiculous that people would, be willing to pay $10, $15 to see something that's going to be on streaming for a service that they're already paying for. That just
Right.
won't
Yeah.
work. Yeah, I can't imagine that there'll ever be a time when we won't be enjoying movies in some way. It's just that we won't be going to theaters to see
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. I am. I remember the last time I even been in the theater. I think it was the last Avengers movie is the last thing I saw in the theater.
It's a long time ago, yeah.
Yeah.
And last time I saw a movie was Spielberg's movie, autobiographical movie, The Fablemans or
Oh
whatever it
yeah.
was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's good. And I only went to see that because a friend wanted to see it. I probably wouldn't have bothered. It's not that the experience of going to the movies is always terrible. It's just that you're taking your chances nowadays.
Yeah.
Attitudes, sort of the normal etiquette of being in a room with other people that you don't know. The etiquette has changed so much that you really don't know what's going to happen when you go to the movies now. And I think it's
Right.
a level of anxiety or stress that sits on top of the movie-going experience and sort of discourages you from going out if you can possibly avoid it.
Yeah, there's certain movies though that I feel like are theater movies, the Avengers movies, because you're in there with the crowd,
Yeah,
and something happens, everybody cheers. I remember I seen Independence Day in a theater.
right.
The experience alone with other people, you know what I'm saying,
Oh,
was
absolutely.
better than the movie.
Right, right.
But there's some
But
movies yeah, I'd rather watch that at home by myself. I don't need crowd cheering behind me when I watch
well,
something.
yeah, and it also raises the question of whether or not there's a change in the type of movies that we're going to be watching in the future. I mean, the types of movies that you described are all movies where you can expect a cheering crowd, right?
Yeah,
And if you look at movies from the 80s, for instance, now that we have some distance from the 80s,
yeah,
we can look at them and we can sort of see them for what they are. They all look very much like crowd pleaser type things. all the Schwarzenegger movies and Jean-Claude Van Damme movies and who else? I don't know, all those action
Yeah, yeah,
stars.
Rambos and yeah,
Right, Sylvester
diehards.
Stallone.
Yeah,
Right.
you
And
cheer
they're
when something blows up or when they
right.
throw the
And
bad guy off a roof.
and the way the movies are edited and the way the dialogue is delivered, it's clearly meant to be seen in a theater. And we don't have that anymore because most of the movies and TV shows that people are actually watching are being delivered to them in their living rooms. So they have a more uh, oblique way of going about things. Nothing is ever direct. Everything's sort of
Right.
pseudo voice, the low key, dark pictures, muted colors. And that, to my mind, represents a reaction to how we're watching movies now. We
The
don't,
have you ever Eddie Izzard, the comedian,
yes.
British comedian, he had a bit about movies and theaters. They're just to sell popcorn because you eat more popcorn. It's like stuff exciting is happening on the screen. It was a funny little bit.
When I used to work in the movie theaters, and we could pretty much tell that there were some films that were going to be big concession films. We
Yeah.
could sell a lot of popcorn and soda and stuff like that. And of course, nowadays we have this new thing, and I don't know how I feel about it. When I went to see the Spielberg movie, it was at one of these Alamo Draft House. Oh no, it was a Nighthawk
Okay.
Cinemas, and they have this thing of having all the food and beverages served to you while you're watching it. And that seems to me to be a very Harry Knowles type of thing. You can
Yeah.
just imagine him all 500 pounds sitting and watching 20 hours of movies with, a meal spread in front of him like Henry VIII. And I don't know if that really is the best way to watch movies.
No.
I can't imagine that that doesn't distracts you because you're eating, but it also distracts the people around you because there's people delivering food to you as much as they try to sort of duck down and not interfere with the movie. It's got to be a distraction to some extent, right?
Yeah, I go to the theater, popcorn, raisinets, that's all I need.
Yeah.
I don't need a
And
four-course meal.
yeah, I don't even know how you could enjoy, you can only enjoy the movie or the meal. You can't enjoy them both
Do
at the
both,
same
yeah.
time. Some things maybe are made, like TV shows might be made so that they know people are watching. I mean, for a time, there was even such a thing as the TV dinner.
The
Do you
TV
remember TV
dinner,
dinners?
yeah. Oh yeah.
So they recognized that people were spending all their time in front of the TV. They didn't want to be taking time away from this precious viewing of television to actually make a meal. So they actually prepared meals, almost like stuff that you would give to an astronaut in a little tin tray that you would heat up quickly and then get back very
Yeah.
quickly back in front of the TV. So you go watch more commercials about TV dinners
There
that
you
you can
go.
buy. There's also another interesting news item, speaking of theaters. I think Netflix owns the Paris Theater in Manhattan now, which is kind of a prestigious theater. I actually worked there once or twice. I worked for the chain that ran it. And they had a bit of a scandal recently because they were running, I forget which movie it was, a classic film. I think it might have been The Conformist. Uh, and it turned out the film started uh, buffering. They were streaming it off of Amazon Prime,
Oh,
and people immediately recognized the interface when it appeared on the screen. I don't know why they would do that, to be honest, because you would think it would be fairly easy to get a Blu-ray or something like that.
yeah.
Uh, and especially when you got a movie, it's a foreign film by a famous director. It's something that is considered a prestigious artistic film, and you're showing it to people that are actually paying top dollar to see it in a movie theater, and you're showing them something they could see at home. And I don't really know how they can get away with that, unless it was a last minute thing, like they didn't get the film in time and they had no
Right.
choice but to. But that's going to, I can't see how that can be helpful to their reputation.
Right.
People are always going to be wondering, what am I looking at here? When I buy a ticket
Yeah.
in this theater, what am I seeing? Anyway, what else can we recommend? Is there any
Let's
other?
see. I've got a list of movies that I've watched since our last. I finally got to watch The Holdovers with
Hold
Paul
on.
Giamatti.
Oh, yes, yes. I meant to, I
The
wanted
one
to see
he,
that
yeah,
too.
it is really good. I
Is it good? Yeah.
recommend it. Yeah, it was perfect script, perfect characters, great dialogue. Just a good really good movie. I enjoyed it.
I'll look
Highly
forward to it.
recommend.
I love all his other movies,
Oh
or
yeah,
that
Paul Giamatti's
director.
great. Yeah.
Well,
Are you talking
and the
about the
director.
director? Yeah, Paul
Yeah,
Giamatti's great too, though. Yeah.
he is, yes. And he was in the director's first big hit, right? Sideways.
Sideways, yeah.
Yeah, which is a film I love. I think that's a
Oh yeah,
terrific
that's great.
movie. Yeah.
Yeah. If you like Sideways, you'll really enjoy the
I'll
whole
look forward
rivers.
to that. Yeah, is that on any of this? I assume it is.
I think I rented it from
Uh,
Google Play, but it seems like Amazon may be getting a lot of their stuff after it comes out because the next
what
movie I watched is now also on Amazon.
what is the next one you watched?
That was the Oppenheimer.
How was that?
It's currently on. It was good. Um, not as good as I thought it was going to be. I think it
Mm,
was built up a lot. And I think one problem I had with it was the one thing that everybody kept talking about was how are they going to do the bomb, right?
mm,
Because he's going to film it and it's going to be practical.
right.
And I watched it and I wasn't impressed with it. I was kind of let down. And then I started thinking about it. I was like, well, the movie's called Oppenheimer. It's about him. It's not
Uh,
about, it's not about the Trinity bomb. So that sort of takes a back seat. But it was still pretty good. Robert Downey Jr. was the best part of that movie.
he won the Oscar for it, if I'm not
I believe
mistaken.
that's what he won
Yeah.
the best supporting actor.
Well, I was curious actually, and I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet, and I haven't seen Barbie yet.
I
Uh,
haven't seen Barbie
but
yet either.
but I was curious when I saw the advertising for Oppenheimer, and I was thinking, this looks like a story about the guy, and yet all the stuff's about what an enormous production it is and how the technical aspects are going to be so impressive. And it's going to
Yeah,
be shown on IMAX screens, and it's going to be a great spectacle. And I couldn't see how that could be because the bomb, the explosion of the bomb, the test bomb, is over in, a flash, literally.
yeah,
You wouldn't think that, and it's more than 2 hours, right?
yeah. It was more 2 hours. I can't remember exactly how long it
Yeah.
was.
So you would think that it would really be just a personal, like a human drama. It wouldn't be a big blockbuster spectacle.
Yeah.
But I
Well,
guess
like I
they
said,
felt they
I
had.
think the way they built up the whole, oh, it's gonna be all practical. It's a real explosion, and then you see it on the screen, and it's just like,
Not a big deal. Yeah.
no.
Well, my theory is that the great success of that movie really is the result of that brilliant meme, the Barbieheimer
The
thing.
Barbieheimer, yeah.
And I think the success of both films, I mean, both films had one advantage in that they had directors that had a very strong following. Christopher Nolan, as people are going to come out to see a Christopher Nolan
Oh
movie
yeah,
no matter what. And that's true to a certain extent of the director, I forget her name, the Barbie director.
yeah.
Uh, she has a strong following and the people are going to come out for her films. But the idea of tying Oppenheimer to Barbie meant that people who really weren't crazy about the idea about a sort of dry, boring thing about a guy making a bomb, they would uh, be willing to go out because at least part of the viewing experience would be this sort of light, colorful musical comedy.
All right, yeah.
And the people that, like particularly the male audience, who might say, well, I don't want to be seen going to see Barbie because
Yeah.
people, you know, they are willing to do it because it's tied connected to this other movie about a guy making a bomb, so it's very masculine,
Yeah.
And they can do it in an ironic way. If anybody says you're going to see Bobby, say, yeah, I'm going to wear pink and go to see Bobby because my wife wants me to, or my girlfriend wants me to,
Right.
and so we're going to see, a guy blowing up a
Yeah.
big bomb afterwards. So that was really a brilliant thing. It wasn't done by the studio, as far as I
Nah,
know,
nah.
but it
I
really,
think it
I
was
think
just
they.
because they happened to open on the same weekend or same day or
Yeah.
something is what
So,
caused it.
so, but they should really write out a big check to whoever started that because
Yeah.
they really made a big difference, I think.
One more movie that I watched that I recommend, it's currently on Netflix, so you should be able to watch it, is the Marcel the Shell with the shoes on.
Oh, yes, I heard good things about that.
Little stop
Right,
motion mixed with live action. Very good movie.
right. Yeah.
You
Well,
just
I'll add
you
that to
ever
the
you
list.
ever want to feel compassion for a little tiny shell that you would buy at like a tourist trap and on the beach somewhere.
Oh,
Definitely recommend that movie.
all right. Well, that's the wonder of animation, right? It can make you
Oh yeah.
feel emotion for little
Inanimate
inanimate
objects.
objects.
Yeah.
Yes. Did you see my Facebook post about the problem with the version of Aliens and True Lies that Mr. Cameron had approved, the new AI
With the
enhanced?
AI stuff, yeah.
So as soon as I heard that, and I heard that they were actually replacing the original version on iTunes, folks who bought it through
Bought it,
iTunes, the
yeah,
original
but yeah.
version, they had it swapped out with the new AI enhanced version. And there were so many people criticizing the AI enhanced version for really just fucking up the image quite a bit. And I went out right away, or I didn't go out. I ordered on Amazon the Blu-ray of Aliens. So I have the Blu-ray version of that before they started screwing around with it. And at the same time, I ordered the Blu-ray version of the Terminator because who knows how long it'll be before they start fucking
Yeah.
around with that. And also the Blu-ray of Escape from New York. And I also sort of a guilty pleasure of mine. I don't have the copy here, I don't think. Oh, yes, I do. Streets of Fire. I don't know if you've ever heard of this movie or if you
Yeah,
care
yeah.
about it. But this played in my movie theater when I was working back in the 80s. I was working for the Cinema 5 chain. And we were sort of on the cusp of turning from a crappy third run theater into a first run theater. And we started to get new releases like this. And it was dead from day one. It didn't stand a chance.
Yeah.
But I always loved it. I always thought it was a wonderfully, sort of movie where the idea is that it's intentionally brainless. It's like a
Yeah.
goofy comic book, it's stupidly violent and stupidly sexy and stupidly romantic. And none of the characters seem to have a brain in their head, but it's filled with all sorts of great music. It moves like a rocket. And it's got a lot of wonderful people in it. Willem Dafoe and
Willem
Rick
Dafoe,
Moranis,
yeah.
and it's a very entertaining film. It's kind of hard to imagine, even if you're a very critical person, as I probably tend to be. It's kind of hard to imagine anybody really not saying they enjoyed this. Just as so brazenly dopey and over the top. So that's one I would recommend if anybody's looking for some fun.
I never considered myself like a a big fan of Spike Lee,
Mhm.
but I recently watched the Black Klansman, which
Uh-huh.
was a movie he made. It was a really good movie. I enjoyed it.
Was it? Yeah.
And then I went back and started looking. Apparently, I watched a bunch of his movies. Didn't realize they were his movies. I guess I am a fan of Spike Lee. I guess the problem was when he first came out, he was making movies that wouldn't appeal to me, right? They were
Mhm.
urban, Yeah, I just wasn't, I didn't watch any of his. But apparently, I watched several of his movies and really enjoyed them. But the Black Klansman's really good. I really recommend that one.
Who's in that? I know I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
The guy from Star Wars, what's his name? Uh, Young actor, played Darth, or played, I can't remember his name now. Yeah, and
Adam
then
Driver.
Adam Driver, yeah.
Right.
Topher Grace, who was on that '70s show, he plays David Duke. Gives a really good
Oh,
performance playing that guy. It was really good. I enjoyed it. It was a really good
all
movie.
right. Well, I'll add that to my list as well.
Yeah.
I got a lot of stuff to watch here. Yeah, Spike Lee, well, he's been around for a long time. I mean, somehow we have this impression of him and people like Quentin Tarantino as being the brash young kids, but actually
Yeah.
he's been around, She's
Yeah.
Gotta Have It, I guess, goes back to the
I think
80s,
so,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
21 Bridges was another one I
That,
watched. It's Chad Boseman guy played in it, whatever his name is, the Black Panther actor that recently
mhm.
died.
Right.
The story was kind of predictable. It's a crime story, cops get shot, so they shut down the whole city, close all 21 bridges in, I guess, Manhattan, so the guys can't escape, and it's a, who done it, and then it's got this, predictable ending. But it was still a pretty good movie.
Well, it sounds intriguing, yeah. I guess anything that he starred in is now um, has special significance, right? Because he
Yeah,
had such a
yeah.
short career. Yeah. I also saw this movie. I don't know if you ever heard of it. Day for Night.
I don't think so.
Well, I was watching on YouTube. Somebody put up Living in Oblivion. Did you ever hear that one?
I don't guess.
That was the one with Steve Buscemi. Is it Buscemi? Buscema? Steve Buscema?
Yeah.
Buscema? Yeah, who I'm talking-
I think I always say Buscemi.
Buscemi? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, he starred in the movie Living in Oblivion, which was a movie about making a movie, making a low-budget independent film. It was pretty well received. Part of the pleasure of watching it was that one of the characters was supposed to represent Brad Pitt, I gather,
Right.
because the director-writer had worked with Brad Pitt previously, and so he was bringing a little bit of his insight into Mr. Pitt's peculiarities. It's either Brad Pitt or Val Kilmer. I think it was Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
Anyway, I watched that and I enjoyed it, but I thought, gee, I seem to remember there was another movie that I liked that was about making movies that I thought was better than this. And I thought, oh, it's that Francois Truffaut film. And I went looking for it online. It's not available anywhere online. I couldn't believe it. This film won the Oscar for Best Foreign Film. You can't find it. And all the versions of the DVD, like this one, are all used. They're all old
Right.
releases. And this is a DVD. I wasn't able to find any Blu-ray. Maybe it's been released in Europe. I don't know, but it's not here in the United States. Anyway, this is a wonderful movie. Very entertaining for anybody who's interested in the process of making movies. This is about as close as it comes, I think, to getting the real feel of what it's like to make low-budget movies. It's not a great drama or anything. It's a charming movie. It's, simple and sweet, and it gives you a real feel for what it's like on a set of smaller films. So
Yeah.
that's one I would definitely recommend. Day for Night by Francois Truffaut, if you can find it anyway.
Right. Yeah. You probably got the only copy left.
I might have gotten the last one, yes. And of course, I should also mention that we did, in our long break, we did manage to get together long enough to do audio commentary tracks for my film Sleepless Nights and also for my film Demon Resurrection.
Yes.
And Demon Resurrection is going to be coming out probably sometime in July on DVD and Blu-ray. First time on Blu-ray. So it's like a little late for the 20th anniversary of
Right,
production of the film, but and the Blu-ray of Sleepless actually turned out to be surprisingly successful. We sold a lot more copies than I
Big hit.
expected us to. Yeah, and also on streaming. We're on a YouTube channel, Stash TV on YouTube, and there was a little interesting event that happened with that where they tried taking our film down and putting it on another channel of theirs,
Right.
and we lost all the views. We were up around 50,000 views, so we were feeling pretty good about it. And then we lost all of that, but they put it back on the main channel at our request, and it's now at around 47,000 views. So in the course of 5 months, we are almost back where we were, which is kind of nice.
Oh, yeah.
Nice to see. So I'm pleased with that, and I thank you for helping out with the audio commentaries.
No problem. I enjoyed it.
Doing Blu-rays is
Yeah.
not something I want to do too often because
Yeah.
it's a tremendous amount of effort
A
involved.
lot of work
But
goes into it.
yeah. But so Blu-rays, I guess, first came out when in the 90s?
I think 2000s.
Was it the 2000s?
Blu-rays, yeah.
So we're only about 20 years behind on coming out with a Blu-ray edition.
Yeah.
We managed to time it so that Blu-rays are no longer popular now. Everybody's going for 4K.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess until we get together again, this was a pretty good episode.
Godzilla Minus One is the one people should jump right
Definitely check it
up
out.
to
Yeah.
there. Yes,
It's on Netflix. I'm sure everybody has Netflix.
I'm sure. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well,
All righty.
till we do this again. Nice talking to you.
Good talking to you too. Take care.